Flies. I'm now from Bowman, and I'm a retired professor at the school here. And this is an impromptu seminar by a great colleague of mine, and he's going to talk about cleaning up the dirtiest harbor in the United States. We'll explain that in a moment. But Bill came into my life about, what, 10 years ago?
Oh, yeah.
It was following Superstorm Sandy, which was 13 years ago last month, that flooded New York City, did $100 billion worth of damage. I set up a little not-for-profit, absolutely not-for-profit, it doesn't have a budget at all, but called New York, New Jersey Storm Surge Working Group. And it was a group of people, many of them in the city. It was like scientists, oceanographers, meteorologists, but then urban planners, lawyers, former politicians, and we've been meeting ever since to try and convince the powers that be in the city and the state that they're going to get serious about protecting New York, Metro New York against another future sort of stand. So anyway, so Bill came into this group. I guess it was through Robert Yarrow, was it?
Yeah.
And he's, remember, Robert Yarrow was a president of a venerable organization called the Regional Plan Associations, not for profit, that advises city governments of what's coming down the pike 25 years from now. And Bill also walked into our group, became an important part of it. He lives in Boston. Bill's educated, well, 3 colleges, but including Yale and Harvard. You got your degree from Yale. You overlapped with Henry here in what, 1970? And that's when he was a sort of a long-haired hippie type looking for a job, pacing the halls of Congress. And you went to see, was a Republican senator from Massachusetts, was it?
Now, that story is simply that I had hair down to here, blue jeans. I was a principal in an anti-war, national anti-war group, and I was there to shut Washington down. Had to spend the night, had no money to get back twice from New Haven. Convinced a guy through a girlfriend of a girlfriend that was working with the White House to hook me up for the night in exchange for a 6-pack of beer. And in that course of that, I met a special counsel of the President of the United States, trying to meet him in the executive office. And about 2 weeks later, I get an envelope offering me a presidential appointment. I turned it down. The president was Nixon, but I thought I was kind of, I mean, the letter was being passed around by my friends. Like this, oh, they don't know who Golden is, you know? And then, so I said, I'm kind of a jerk. I called the guy up. He said, well, if you won't be a presidential appointee, take a civil service exam. And if you score really high on that, we'll hire you in HUD and then second you to the White House as a civil servant. And that's what I did. That's all I got involved in the segment. Yeah. Side story.
All right, so, and then Bill did a law, what was your first degree in Yale?
No, I was undergraduate.
Undergraduate.
Yeah, and then bar, and then an MPA after that.
At Harvard.
Yeah.
Now, Bill, keep short. So Bill done many things. So he's a businessman, he's an attorney, he's an environmental champion. He is, he was the solicitor or the attorney for the city of Quincy, Massachusetts, which is just south of Boston. And
I'm a friend of Malcolm Bowman's. What could be a higher recommendation?
so
Thank you,
let's get
Malcolm.
started. So, so I don't need to say any more.
You don't have to say.
I'll change the slides for you if you like.
Okay,
You can say next, or you can do it.
Okay.
So.
I'm gonna tell you a story. I'm gonna tell you.
Down by the river, by the big River Charles, right? That's where you'll find me. Let's pull this something. Not animal. Okay. I forgot to mention, Bill was a 3-term.
Love that dirty water.
Bill was a three-term Massachusetts state senator. But for 6 years, he ran for the lieutenant governor of the state, but was narrowly defeated. So sorry, I forgot about that. Okay,
That's all right. So I could do this, I think.
but the next one I have to put on.
Okay,
Explain what this is.
okay. So, the story I'm about to tell is the story of the Queen of Boston Harbor. But it's a story of science, it's a story of engineering, it's a story of being in the right place at the right time. It's a story about us all knowing we can make a difference and the obligation that each of us must try. And it's a story about presidential politics. As we began the cleanup, my friend Michael Dukakis was running for president against George W. Bush. And Bush came to Boston and did an ad. This is the ad. This was before the cleanup.
As a candidate, Michael Dukakis saw Boston Harbor an open sewer. As governor, he had the opportunity to do something about it, but chose not to. The Environmental Protection Agency called his lack of action the most expensive public policy mistake in the history of New York. Now, Boston Harbor, dirtiest harbor in America, will cost residents $6 billion to clean. And Michael Dukakis promises to do for America. It's done for Massachusetts.
Okay, I was actually there when that ad was made. I was at a home I owned on a barrier beach that had no electricity, nothing. And I opened the door one in the morning, and somebody was pounding at the door, and I was staring into that belt buckle of 6'5" state trooper saying, "I've got the governor on the line. I want you to talk to him." And Michael said, "Bush is coming to town. I want you there. Senator from Maine's coming down. We're going to have a speech on the State House. We're going to try to stop the impact of what he's trying to do in Boston." So I organized a flotilla of about 200 boats to surround the boat he was on, to try to keep him from doing any of this video, which we did, but he got other video instead. Anyway, so, like all of you, I had no idea as a kid what I was doing or what I was doing that might prepare me for later in life. But I knew one thing. I knew my passion. I knew what I really enjoyed as a kid. And I spent my whole life around the water, on the water, by the water, and under the water, and surrounded by the natural environment and the need for us to have a sustainable relationship with it. So I formed a club in the 6th grade, the Explorers Club, and got some of my classmates to join. And we went down to Nauset Beach in Cape Cod to look at what the glaciers had done and study all that. And of course, this is in 1960, we cooked our hot dogs on a solar stove or furnace. So whatever you're doing, as you can see clear in that picture, whatever you're doing as a kid or whatever you're doing now, if you are going to aspire to greatness, which I read the sign as I walked in, that's a challenge that SoMAS extends to all of us. Look at what you really have enjoyed in life, what really motivates you, what pushes you, what's going to push you to greatness. And it's often that passion, that love that you've had early in life and that you follow through. That's me right there. I can name everybody there. And it is a life force. This guy was a friend of mine, CIA agent, and was murdered in Thailand. The others, this guy became an engineer. I could go through the all. But that's what drives you. Next slide. So we're going to talk about Boston. How many of you have been to Boston? Okay. It's a huge, bustling city. You've been to the seaport in Boston, that new area, Well, in 1775, this is Boston. Boston now is all of this and all of this. It's all filled in. It's all filled in. But Boston originally was 3 hills with a little narrow isthmus that connected it. In fact, when the Redcoats decided to invade Boston and put it under martial law, they were afraid that the colonialists were going to attack. And so they stayed in Boston. They came back from every place else. The Tories moved back in. And they had guards right there because they felt that was the only way that they could be attacked. Until after Lexington conquered, Washington got the cannons. And put them up here over Dorchester Heights, and he could shoot at all the ships there and everybody left. And they went to New York, by the way. I'm a Red Sox fan, some of you might be Yankees fans, but I always remind people that we stood up to the British and you hosted them. So anyway, going to now, next map, 2025. This is just, it's not a kind of, doesn't have the same view the other map had. This is the tip of Boston over here, the isthmus was up here. This is filled land, all filled land down here. And there are 15 cities and towns that make up Boston Harbor. And so this whole area has become kind of a mega metropolis. There are ferries that go back and forth from this peninsula out here and from Deer Island up there. But what began to develop is Boston knew it had a sewer problem. You know, since 1773, when the Patriots dumped the first tea in Boston Harbor and turned it brown, there has been a distinct odor to the harbor. When you had a chamber pot, you just threw it in the street or you threw it in the drains. And from that time, the pollution of Boston Harbor has just grown and grown and grown. And there have been some engineering efforts to control and reduce the public health threat of sewage. So one of the early attempts to do this was in the 1800s. And there's an area here called Moon Island, and there was a facility built here, which was like a big storage facility, about the size of a football field or two maybe, surrounded by high brick walls. And all the sewage from the south of Boston was pumped into that. And then with the outgoing tide, they just release it on the tide. Great idea. They got tremendous awards for this and everything else. Nobody really understood that the tide goes out and then the tide comes back. And in a prevailing wind, all of that, so it never worked at all. So the next attempt to do something about it was to put a distribution place in place, distribution system in place, with pipes as high as the ceiling here, with triple brick, made of brick, these pipes. And they went as far as Framingham, which is about 20 miles away from Boston Harbor. And they would collect all the sewage from south of Boston, and it would go down to Howe's Neck in Quincy. And there was a treatment plant built there in 1952. The day it opened, it failed to function because all the tanks that were supposed to be treating it had not been done on a level. And so the separators and the aeration, everything, nothing worked. But it had a marginal effect anyway. And they would release the quote treated sewage from the tip of Howe's Neck. 1969, they say we got to do something for the north of Boston. So they have these other pipes built and tunnels built. And it comes to Deer Island, and they do the same thing. They release it from Deer Island after primary treatment. Unfortunately, the first letter they got when they opened the plant was from the Smithsonian saying everything you put in is so antiquated and it's the last of its kind. So when you finally remove it, send it to the Smithsonian. It wasn't a lot of forward thinking going on. So at that point, there was a tremendous pollution from Howe's Neck and Deer Island, and from things called CSOs, another engineering breakthrough. If you've got stormwater flowing through your city and you want to get rid of sewage, why not use the same pipe? Put the stormwater and the sewage in the same piping system. And then, of course, even if you have treatment facilities, because of the stormwater, you can't, the sewage won't go to the treatment facilities, it'll mix with the stormwater, and that will just discharge from the CSOs. And there were over 100 CSOs by the time I got involved. So that led to those visuals. I'm sorry you couldn't see them very well, of how foul the harbor was. The harbor was the dirtiest harbor in America. It was a cesspool. So that's the situation. Next slide. Something called the MDC, the Metropolitan District Commission, comes into play. It started out as a series of parks. Then they said, oh, okay, well, we've got a water supply and a sewage distribution system. Why doesn't the MDC take control of that? And then they wanted to build skating rinks and swimming pools, and okay, the MDC will take care of that. And it needs its own police force, so they'll have that as well. So in 1982, when I became city solicitor of the city of Quincy, this district, which went all the way out to Framingham, included all of metropolitan Boston and all the way out past the Beltway, and had basically 41 cities and towns in it that had water supply and sewage treatment services through the MDC. Now, what was the problem with the MDC? Well, they collected user fees every time you flush your toilet. You use more water, and had to pay the water bill to the town, and the town had to give it to you'd think it'd go to the MDC, but it didn't go to the MDC. All the user fees from these 41 cities and towns went to the legislature. And the legislature voted on the budget of the MDC and what they would be doing. Well, you're a state rep in Dorchester, in Quincy. You want to run for re-election and say to the people, 20 feet under you is a huge new pipe, re-elect me? Or would you rather say, I'm cutting the ribbon to the new swimming pool on your block, re-elect? So there are a lot of swimming pools built, a lot of skating rinks built, no treatment of this distribution system or adjustment of the plants that house Neck and Deer Island. And that was really why, even though the MDC was not single mission, it was running pots and everything along with water supply. So 1982, Michael Dukakis is reelected. I'm very close. I run a tenth of the state to get him reelected. Back then, there was a bipartisan kind of spirit to things. And even though I had been a fierce opponent of a mayoral candidate that was running in 1981 for mayor of Quincy, the last mayoral election had its winner thrown out because of a court of inquiry when they found that the police had stuck the ballot boxes. So this guy was a Republican, a banker. I had a huge fight with him where we were literally swearing at each other at public meetings. And he called me up one day and said, Bill, this may surprise you, but you're president of the Squantum Community Association, this little place in Quincy. And I'm going to, I want to have coffee with you. I have something to tell you. So he says, we meet, he says, I'm going to run for mayor. And I know what you feel about me, but I felt out of respect, I had to tell you. I said, well, this is going to surprise you. I'm going to support you. In fact, I became his co-campaign manager. This was because he was the only honest guy in the entire city. And even though he was a Republican, I wanted to support him. Now, I took that in account that I was also at the exact same time running a tenth of the state to get Mike Dukakis, a Democrat, elected. So that field district campaign leader was not happy that the biggest city in this district, Democratic city, I was supporting the Republican. But that's when you cross the aisle a bit, if you really believed in something, and I did. I became his co-campaign manager, and then when it's over, he asked me if I'd become his city solicitor. And I said three things. I'll become your city solicitor. First, I said, no. Kept it up. I said, if I'll give you a legal opinion or I'll give you a political opinion, but I'll never give you a politicized legal opinion. So take that or leave it. Second thing is you get to appoint everybody that serves in the office. You can fill it up with patronage. But if I don't think these people are qualified, I get veto power. So nobody comes into my office unless I approve. And third, if we ever have a chance, I want to do something about the pollution in Quincy Bay and Boston Harbor. Those are the three conditions. Lots of things going on. We deal with a lot of crises. Nothing about the harbor. We never get to the harbor. Next slide. So by this time, it was clear that literally in the media, everyone across the country, Boston is the dirtiest harbor in the United States. Next slide. So one day, that's me and my English master. I would run in the mornings because I don't really like to run. I like to do it before I really wake up in the morning. But I feel good afterwards. So Wallaston Beach runs all along the shoreline of Quincy from Howe's Neck all the way down to the Boston border. And I'd go down there and run every morning. So I'm on my morning run. And there's a phenomenon that some of you that have more biological reference might understand, where jellyfish floats come in sometimes. And when the tide goes out, there's jellyfish from high water to low water. So I'm running through this and squish, 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 and I'm not really, the sun's coming up. And all of a sudden I look down and it's not jellyfish. A guy hadn't shown up for his tour at, or his session at the sewage treatment plant at House Neck. And so the guy, having no replacement, wanted to go home, just opened all the gates, and 200 million gallons of raw sewage had come out and just covered everything. And he thought nobody would ever notice because, you know, it's so polluted. And I was running through raw sewage. I was running through everything that went into the sewer system, from condoms to feminine hygiene products to everything else, all a gelatinous mass. And I'm looking down and I just got pissed. And I realized this was a time. So I got in my Volkswagen Bug, drove to the mayor's office, came in. The mayor had been a clam digger before he became a bank president. And he's sitting in his office, which is about this big, he had a big mahogany desk, thick blue carpet, gold drapes. And I come in with this stuff on my feet. I come up to his desk and I go like this. This is on your after the beach this morning. You gotta do something about this now. And he said, wait, take your sneakers off, right now. And send me a memo or something. You seem a little upset. I said, I am upset. And by 9 a.m. I had the memo on his desk. And my first thing is, I don't really know what to do about this. The federal court had just done fussing and they didn't want to be active. They didn't want to take an active position on anything, let alone cleaning up harbor and creating a multi-billion-dollar project. So I knew I couldn't take it into federal court. And on the state court side of things, you had the governor and all those people pretty much in control of this. So I went around, I said, I can't win a case. So I'm gonna go around and tell people that it's their job to clean up Boston Harbor and they should do it. So I go to a guy named Les Sun, Regional Administrator of EPA. When I was at EPA, I used to have a book with free tickets where I could go any airline, anytime, and go out and visit the 15 regions of EPA and do all that. And so I knew this guy. Came in, I said, Les, you gotta, you know, if we have something called clean water, you gotta enforce it. Look at Boston Harbor. He said, sorry, Bill, not on my list of things to do today. And he said, right. Then I go to the US attorney. There's a guy named Bill Weld. See a photo of him later on. Governor, future presidential candidate. He said, not on my agenda, Bill. Then I go to the attorney general, a guy named Frank Bellotti, who's from Quincy. Dear Frank. I said, Frank, we gotta do something. Nope, got other things on my agenda. Governor doesn't really want to address this now. Fine. So then I went to the legislature and I worked my way up and finally get into the office of the chair of public works. Very joint committee, very powerful guy. And I don't know if you ever saw the movie The Natural, where Robert Redford comes into this room and it's dark and there's one lamp with the smoke coming up from a guy smoking a cigar behind it. That was the scene. So I come in and I sit down and I say, you know, we've got a problem. I want to create a new agency here to address this. And he listens to me for only 5-10 seconds, and he screams at me. He says, kid, if you do anything that requires my constituents in Framingham to pay 1 more cent for flushing their toilets, you are dead meat in this city. I will never let up on you. You will never practice law. You will never do anything. Get out of my effing office. So no help out there to do anything. So we draft a lawsuit. I get all my 35 members of my law office together in the mayor's office, you know, with the mayor. And I said, we're filing this suit, but we're doing this as a gesture because there's no way we're going to win this. We had no money. My experts were a company that rented small boats out so people could go fishing. People from New York come up and go flounder fishing, and they start getting flounder with 2 heads or with big sores on them. And then I had a scuba diver that said, when you go down, there's about 4 feet of muck everywhere. That's the sludge from the sewer system. And I got a lobsterman that said every time he pulled up his traps, it was this and that. Those were my experts. So I said, we're not going to win this, but it's worth a try. So next slide. So we filed a lawsuit in 1982, but before filing the lawsuit, it was unethical and unlawful to try to pick your own judge. Before in the 60s, 70s, common practice. You wanted to file your case before a particular judge, and instead of getting a number for a judge here and there, that's how they do in federal court now, you're just on a rotation, you don't know who you're gonna get. So that was state law at the time too, so I walked in and said to my crowd, this is how we're gonna do it. There were many Superior Court judges, I think there was 60 or 70 at the time. I researched every single one of them. I read their major cases, and there was one judge, only one, that was totally certifiable. He was a guy that never met a state agency that he didn't want to put into bankruptcy. I'm sorry, the receivership. So he'd take on over the Essex County jails, the Boston Housing Authority, and I thought, this is my only chance. So I filed it in our local court, and then for 6 months, I don't do anything. Now, why, on the other side, they thought I wasn't going to do it, because I had filed this against the Democratic governor I didn't like that Mike was running against, so that when he came in, he could do something about it. So I met with Mike. Mike called me up one day. He says, about this lawsuit, Bill, come over, I'm gonna fix your breakfast. Come over, sat down, fix some breakfast for me. He says, Bill, I want you to drop the lawsuit. And I said, Mike, I just worked my ass off to get you reelected, but I'm not dropping this lawsuit. And he said, Bill, it's gonna be a problem. I said, it's not gonna be a problem if you support it and jump right in and agree to take apart the MDC, like I want to take apart. He said, we're not gonna do that. We're not, we got into a really heavy discussion, and then he had to go and make a speech. He said, jump in my car, we went there. He said, put Frank on the phone. The Attorney General, Frank, it's Bill again. I'm trying to do something about Boston Harbor. Drop the suit, Bill. We're gonna be on the other side. We'll totally outgun you. We'll flood you with papers. So try, Frank, I've got to do this. Nothing's gonna happen unless I don't. So I waited and waited, but what I was doing was I didn't have cold feet. I was waiting for this judge, Paul Garrity, not Arthur Garrity did the federal case on busing, but Paul Garrity, the certifiable one, to get rotated into the motion session of the court I had filed the case. As soon as he did that, I marked up my 15 motions. 14 of them meant nothing. They were like, post a sign if the bridge, if the beach is polluted, or do this, or just minor stuff. The 15th asked the court to appoint a master, because a master would come in, help find the facts, and produce a big budget for expert witnesses. So the night before, I knew the head of the MPC, he was a good friend, and he was really upset I had sued him. It was his dream job. And I said, and he called me up, and again, a scene from Cousin Vinny, where the attorney calls up and says, oh, you're doing a pretty good job, but I got a little surprise for you next morning. And so I walk in the next morning, and he's agreed to 14 out of the 15 things I'm looking for. The one thing he didn't agree to was the master. So I stood up, made my case, and the judge says, I don't understand. We're a court of law. You're asking to take apart a government agency and create another agency. And he said, what are you asking? And that's what I told him I really wanted. And he said, well, that's a job for the legislators, not a job for the court system. And I went on a little bit, and he said, you've been very helpful, Mr. Gold, extremely helpful. Anything else you want to say? I said, no. He said, well, why don't you sit down? And so the 3 assistant attorney generals and state AG assistants all stand up to be recognized, and then present their case sequentially. And he says, oh, you guys should sit down. He said, I'd be happy to hear from you, but I think I've heard enough. I don't think I have to hear anything from you. So he had made up his mind to go against me. Didn't want to waste anybody's time. So what I had done coming out of the house that morning is I had taken a big box and scrawled I drew a skull and crossbone on all sides with danger, toxic, don't touch, like a kid would have done in the 3rd grade. And I took people used to use dishwashing gloves back then, these long yellow gloves that you would take. So I grabbed a pair of those, and I knew this was 0 hour. I had to do something. So I bring out the box. I said, can I present 2 exhibits before you render your opinion? He said, sure, go ahead. So I take this box out. You got to understand, this is the courtroom. It's filled with media, with all kinds of TV stations, everything. And they're looking at me like, this kid is crazy. So I bring this out. I open it out, and I take out a beaker that's like this. And it's a beaker that I filled up that day I was walking on the beach. And it had everything that was in the water that day. And it was now 2 years, no, a year and something later. So I said, hey, can I approach the bench with exhibit A? He said, sure. So I come up and I swirl it around and I put it, and the judge is kind of looking at all that stuff I described, going around. And then I said, exhibit B. And I said, this is what was on the sand that day. And it had condoms and feminine tampons and everything else in it. And I said, Your Honor, that's what was on the beach that day, and that's where the kids were gonna go swimming when the rich kids were in Nantucket, on the Vineyard and Cape Cod. And that's what's gonna happen for the rest of their lives. They're gonna accept that because it's nobody like me that remembers it was ever clean. And that's gonna be the fate of Boston Harbor. And he just looked at this and he looked very reflective, very serious. And he looked at the council and said, I'll hear you now. And he entered that day an order to appoint a special master. Now, 6 months later, we were seeking, and what were we seeking? The only way to get something out of this, well, he couldn't create a new agency. But what I wanted him to do, I wasn't asking for tertiary treatment or a deep ocean outfall. I was asking for the institutional capacity to replace the MDC so that it could get the funds directly to the agency and have independent bonding authority over multiple generations to do what had to be done there, $6 billion project. And the only way to do that was to create pressure on the legislature. So what this suit did is seek an injunction against all new sewer and hookups and water hookups in the city of Boston and the 41 surrounding cities and towns. A disaster economic, a disaster. And that's what he did. He eventually put in all this evidence. He did it. While he was doing it, by the way, the Conservation Law Foundation files a suit in federal court seeking fines against Boston and state and everything. And I had a disagreement with them. I said, we need to keep all the money here if we're going to do something. Why are you trying to get money to go to the federal government for not doing the right thing? But their suit was in federal court, and Judge Mazzone, who was a famous judge, said, until Bill Golden and Quincy finish their suit, I'm doing nothing with your suit, because we need this new institution in place as a defendant to get anything done. So the injunction in it was reversed by the Mass Appeals Court within 24 hours. So we're back to square one, right? Not so much. Next slide. The judge that Sunday at the appeals court goes out on Boston Harbor, and this is the front page of the Boston Globe, saying, you want more facts? I'll get you more facts. And from 10 o'clock every morning to 1 o'clock every day, we put in more and more and more evidence. And the legislature and the governor saw where this was going. And he was determined. He was then called the sludge judge after that. And he was determined to find enough facts to support an injunction that would have shut down 42 cities and towns, including the city of Boston, from development. And again, certifiable. Great guy, but not the guy you want pissed off on the other side. So what happens to that? The legislature caves, and by the end of 1984, they create this Massachusetts Water Resources Authority, which was after putting evidence from 10 to 1, would show up on the Hill and negotiate with the legislature and the governor. And this was the result of it. They did create it. It stood up to the test of time because it's 2.5 million people. Now 61 cities and towns have joined this system. And it's the governance system that has kept this going. Because what happened immediately, we had the lowest water and sewer fees in the United States because nobody was doing anything. There's no need for high fees. And in the first year and a half, those fees doubled, and then they tripled, and then they quadrupled. And you had to therefore reassure people that this was fair and equitable and necessary and was going to be efficient and effective. So the governance system was key. The governance system had a board of directors, and this was a big negotiating thing of 11 directors. 3 were appointed by the governor, 3 by the city of Boston, because the facilities were in Quincy and Winthrop, Deer Island and House Neck. They each got 1. And then they set up an advisory board in which every city and town had a member of the advisory board and they had the power to control the budget to a certain extent. And they would go out and talk to every city and town what the budget was and what it did. And they got to appoint 3 members to the board. So it was felt that this was a fair deal. Everybody had input, everybody had some control over it. Next slide. So as this is being set up, the judge and myself and a Globe reporter and the head of the Audubon Society are invited to the New England Aquarium to celebrate the commencement of the cleanup. And we're telling our little story, and the guy from the Globe who was he's Canadian actually, older guy, been writing these articles to clean up Boston Harbor forever, stands up and says, we haven't done enough. We're saying we've got the MWRA, this is a great thing, it's all gonna be cleaned up. And no, what he says is we need an intelligent, barely constrained law to stay on the backs of the government agencies and make sure that's what happens. So I said, let's do it right here. Let's set up this organization. We'll call it Save the Harbor, Save the Bay. And the judge is there and the Globe guy, and then the Audubon guy says, I'll fit up $15,000. And that launched this organization that had monitors the cleanup of Boston Harbor. We used to give what we called harborside tours when we first started the agency. That's harbor CIDE tours. And we'd go up all over the place and show we'd go over the outfall, show all this stuff that was happening. And then later, as a state senator, I ran for the Senate in 1984. The same year, I was still fighting to get the MWRA set up. And what was happening at that point is my opponent was saying, this guy just doubled, he tripled, he quadrupled your fees. You're paying, instead of paying $300, you now pay $800-900 for water and sewer. And I would stand up and say, yes, but the harbor's gonna be really cleaned up. And if it's gonna cost this amount, don't you want somebody that knows where those dollars are going so we can keep those fees down? And I got elected with 60% of the vote. But when I got in, I said, throughout the United States, there is no institute in a academic setting that focuses exclusively on urban harbors. So I offered a bill, and Senate President was Billy Bulger, the brother of Whitey Bulger, who was the serial killer. And Billy and I didn't get along that well. You get to do a maiden speech when you're elected to the Senate. Most people wait a year or two, kind of get a sense. I did it the first day I was there, and I knew only two things about it. Is that whatever I said, everybody would be there, and the Senate President would be presiding, and two, at the end, they'd all applaud me, because that was custom. So I began my speech by saying, quo isque ubique, and I went on in Latin, and the Senate President spoke Latin, no one else did, and I understood Latin. And I said, how much longer are you going to try our patience, you dictator, you breaker of public trust? And I went on to just rip him a new one. And of course, everybody's smiling, they can't understand, he's getting redder. I'm sending him a message that I don't care who's in the room, I'm gonna relate directly to you at your level, and we're either gonna have a relationship or not. Well, everybody stands up at the end and applauds me for ripping off new one, which, they didn't know. So that was I had the smallest office in the Senate for the whole 3 terms I was there. But I got one of the biggest staffs, and one of the things, he represents South Boston, and he knew how bad it was. So he supported, as a freshman, getting this legislation through. And that's another, sometimes you think that your people you disagree with, it was Richard Nixon that set up EPA, no one. I could disagree with him more, but I worked with him, or the mayor that I shouted with, but gave me the opportunity to file the suit. Or Billy Bulger, who disagreed with me on choice, disagreed with me on gay rights, disagreed with me on the death penalty, on every fundamental thing that I had. But on these things, you could establish a relationship. Very important to remember today, when red doesn't talk to blue, blue doesn't talk to red, nobody talks to purple. We have got to figure a way how we can come together and communicate, even though we're in different places. Next slide. So,
Bill, we got 10 minutes.
okay, I'll wrap this up quickly. 1985, the suit is over, the MWRA is set up. Judge Mazzone says, okay, now we'll merge the Quincy suit together with the CLF, or Conservation Law Foundation suit. And I resigned at that point. I was now in the Senate from the special assistant city solicitor I had become. And that suit went on and on and on. To some extent, even though it went on for 31 years before the final order was issued after 239 compliance orders on all kinds of things during that year. But the group that came together to clean up the harbor were really a special group. Really, this kind of the group that stars fell on. the head of the MWRA, the head of engineering, the Dukakis administrator. It was so unfair that Dukakis actually got hit in this in 1988 because he was undertaking a monumental task when Bush had reduced EPA funding from 90% to 10%. Now, he criticized Dukakis because in 1974, Dukakis had been governor and could have cleaned up the harbor with 90% federal funding and 10% state and local and share uses money. But he didn't do that at that time, principally because Massachusetts was an economic mess. And that was kind of what he was trying to emphasize when he ran against. But in 2016, we still have different issues. But the harbor is now, next slide, the cleanest harbor in America. This is Dukakis and Bush. Again, in 1988, they ran against each other. Bush really, just gave Dukakis a real whacking in the election, and yet they remained friends and could talk to each other even after the election. Next. So this is the product. This is what the MWRA built. These are the digesters. This is all the settling tanks, the treatment facilities, and they have an 8.5-mile tunnel that goes out. Not so they don't release anything in Boston Harbor. It goes out into Massachusetts Bay. They have their wind turbines. They planned this really interesting because they planned it so it's at a level above the ocean, so sea level and storm surge and all that isn't going to be a fact. The only development in Boston that took climate change into consideration 15 years, 20 years earlier, but it's really functioned well. Next slide. Close up of the digesters. Next slide. Even closer up. These are really fantastic organization. And by the way, as I said, they now all of that effluent, when it's treated to a secondary level, goes in the outfall and goes out into Massachusetts Bay. So I created the MWRA, and about 3 years later, I sued the MWRA. I sued them to try to stop the ocean outfall because I felt that would, if they started distributing or releasing this outfall and their treatment fell below the standard it was, or if there was some impact on Massachusetts Bay that was not predictable, like we have a thermocline and underneath that's about 46, 47 degrees, and this was being discharged in the cold water, and whether or not as it grows it would create these great algae blooms and how much nitrogen was in there. So I lost the lawsuit. I walked out of I went all the way up to the Supreme Court in Massachusetts, a lawsuit. I lost it after the Attorney General and I walked out of the argument. Said, "Oh, you just won that case." It's because my argument was they needed a permit to discharge into an area of critical environmental concern, and this was the border of the area of critical environmental concern, and this was the end of the pipe, discharging hundreds of millions of gallons. The argument was that the statute said into, and this was outside. Even though we agreed the facts that everything that came out of it went into. And court, it's another lesson. I was writing the law, lost the case because the court decided that this had to happen. So from a political and whatever point of view. So next slide. So after the cleanup really got underway by 2000, we became a model for the country. When I was over in Asia, I built a business out of Jakarta, Indonesia, 10 years in the 90s. And when I went into Hong Kong for the first time to set up one of my offices there, I was called by the royal secretary for Hong Kong, was British official at that time, and wanted to go through every step we went through to clean up Boston Harbor. Boston Harbor became a model all around the world. Next. So Charles River gets clean. Love that dirty water, right? We're enforcing the Clean Water Act. This is Bill Well, the guy that wouldn't do anything about Boston Harbor. Now he's governor, and they're celebrating the fact that the water is now a B+ level in clarity. And in the middle of giving a speech, he decides he's going to dive in the water. Show how clean it was. The governor stripped off his jacket and dove in the water. This is Secretary of Environmental Affairs. He followed her. And that was showing how clean it was. Well, next slide. Cut the crap, right? That is this program being run by the Charles River Watershed Association, because recently they still have a few CSOs and they were under a variance to the Clean Water Act for a period of time to clean up the CSOs. Now, as you get more rainfall into those combined sewer out, and if you project that over time, actually, if you do nothing, just from the additional rainfall, you're going to have many more incidents of high pollution in the Charles River. So they had 39 alternatives they looked at, and the one they chose was the least alternative to clean up anything. And they presented it 3 weeks ago to the Massachusetts Water Resource Authority. And I've worked with the Charles River Watershed Association for a long time, and they started this program and confronted the board of the MWRA, which was supposed to vote on it this week. And the board is taking it off the agenda. They're trying to figure out what to do. But my point is, the fight for clean water never ends, because if they get to reclassify it, which they requested, to a B+ CSO, which meant you could continue dumping in the water, I argued that the next step would be to do the same thing in Boston Harbor, because you get on that slippery slope. So next slide. So, thank you very much, SoMAS, thank you very much. I was gonna play again the song, I love that dirty water, Boston, you're my town, but you heard it already. So thank you very much for the update. Questions? Anyone have questions? So what are you guys gonna do when you get out? I mean, I'll tell you right now, I had no idea I could do this. And you guys have no idea what you're capable of. You know, don't go by the rules. Don't be afraid to break the rules, you know? And don't be afraid to share your vision with people that have absolutely the opposite vision and have if you see the world as round, they see the world as flat. Engage them, find common ground, find that one thing that connects you as human beings. So you get to know each other, and maybe they'll just, in a moment of weakness and after a couple of scotches, agree with you and do what you want them to do. So thank you very much. Malcolm, thank you very much. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Bill.
Thanks.
You mentioned my cousin Vinny. Now, that was a funny movie about two young men who get arrested. Where was it, in Texas?
In
And
the south somewhere, I'm not sure it was.
and the one of the actors was what was his name? Macchio, Ralph Macchio.
Yeah.
My wife taught his son at a school in Setauket. Yeah.
I don't believe in coincidence. I only believe in destiny. So you're gonna take all these little coincidences and let them drive you.
But anyway,
So maybe,
look, well, you said Boston has 100 CSOs, that's combined sewer overflow. So when
They
it
have-
rains, you have to just bypass the treatment because there's too much water. New York City has 770 CFOs.
CSOs.
You know, it's a huge problem, and
It's an expensive problem. The other problem is, even if it's not a combined sewer overflow, let's say it's just stormwater, and you're just trying to get stormwater out of your city. Those are gravity fed systems. So what happens when you have a gravity fed system and you have sea level rise and storm surge that creates sufficient hydraulic pressure to keep that flow from flowing? It goes back into the streets, back into the basements, back into the houses. And that's what happens, you have sewage all over your.
it happens in New York
And
City.
stormwater.
My daughter Sally one of my daughters lives in Brooklyn. And during one of these extreme rainfall events, it wasn't a storm surge, it was rainfall. An old house, 125 years old, in the basement there are gratings and there's pipe to the sewer system, we're all backed up. She had a foot of sewage in her house, it's that bad.
And here's a Toyota on the street filled up above the steering wheel with sewage and the like.
One thing Bill didn't say is that recently he and his wife Kristen, who's in town, they live in Salem, Massachusetts, have set up a pirate museum. It's called the Real Pirate Museum. It was real treasure. That's another story for another time. And also, Bill, this is amazing. Bill, what, 10, 15 years ago, off the east coast of New England and New York City, there were floating lightships. There were lighthouses that were floating and were anchored permanently to allow safe passage into New York Harbor. What that was called Ambrose. If you go to South Street Seaport, Manhattan, there's one anchored there, red ship. And also off the coast further up, off Cape Cod. And these were there for 150 years, was it in all? It's
Yeah,
a whole
It's
story.
130. Yeah.
And Bill, and now it's all automated, so these ships were being sold for scrap. And Bill bought 2 ex lighthouses on eBay. Have you ever heard of anybody buying ships on eBay? I bought one of my old cars on eBay, but that seemed to be a wondrous thing. So one of them is Bill's wife, Kristen, who's in town, rebuilt one into a floating, like a hotel. What would you
No, it's
call it?
a luxury yacht that we charter out by the week, and we've. BBC chartered it, and then one of the people there was the producer of Monty Python, so he calls up everybody, and then we had the Monty Python group charter at the next, then the jet cheerleaders wanted it, it went on and on. It's a good run in New York here.
So at 2:30, we have a meeting with the mayor of Port Jefferson. Because Bill is interested in bringing a ship, the light ship. Be a floating restaurant, come museum, and instructional thing to Port Jefferson. And the funny thing is, the mayor of Port Jefferson is a woman called Lauren Shiprow, who used to work here. She used to be a publications officer. It's a small world. So look, thank you very much, Bill, and for all the inspiration and the courage you've shown over the years, and fearless, and yet you're a lovely guy. So thank you very much. What's your new job? You've got a new job now.
Yeah, I'm a full-time employee for a group called Engineering Systems, Inc., which is one of the largest forensic engineering firms in the United States, and we're heading up a new effort so that the company starts not only figuring out what failed, but how to prevent failure. And so we're in resiliency options, trying to use this expertise to protect the cities and towns and find funding in an era where there is no funding by doing some very creative, innovative things.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you for your time.